Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Serby. I'm EVP Marketing at Zefr. We're a technology and data company that works to provide brand suitability and video across complex mediums. We're very excited today to be joined by Joanna O'Connell, the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, around a new study that was commissioned by Zefr with Forrester Consulting, all around the maturation of brand suitability. It's a very hot topic in the industry, but there's not that much research and rigor that's gone on around the topic. So we're really excited to be joined by Forrester today to talk about some of the research that's been conducted and why companies must leverage brand suitability tech to build consumer trust. And there's a lot that we'll get into today. So we're very excited to have Joanna here because it's a new area and we're really excited to have some leading research in this space. At a very high level, when we think about brand suitability and what Zefr cares about, it's really about the idea of responsible marketing. So when we think about what Zefr does, it's about understanding suitability standards so that a video can be matched to the right ad, digital risk is minimized, investments maximized, and social responsibilities are upheld. So when we think about it, it's beyond just advertising. There's benefits for the advertiser, making sure that they're in front of content that's suitable for their environment. It's good for the platform because they're keeping their consumers and their advertisers happy. It's good for the viewer because they're seeing ads next to content that's suitable for them. And it's good for the overall corporate social responsibility values of a company, making sure they're being upheld in a standardized way. And it allows us to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that are apparent in a lot of the digital environments, right? There's, as part of open platforms, there's hate, there's racism, there's misinformation. Brand suitability is really the evolution of brand safety to make sure that these new topics that are often a game of whack-a-mole are being proactively avoided. And when we think about media responsibility and responsible marketing, there are a couple key trends that are happening in this space that are really giving shape to everything. One of those initiatives, which we are huge supporters of and we think have really changed the industry, is around the idea of the Global Alliance of Responsible Media, called GARM. Up until 2020, the idea of brand suitability and responsible marketing has been really subjective. It's been hard to pin down because there's been no common taxonomy or vernacular. What they did was they went through across both the platforms, the brands, and the leading agencies in the world, and they started to define the different risk levels around media responsibility. And this helped create a framework for a lot of the companies in the space to really understand what brand suitability was so that brands could make a much more informed decision around it. This is a new initiative over the last 2 years, and we think it's going to be a game changer for the future state of brand suitability technologies. We're already seeing a lot of the major agencies in the industry adopt the GARM industry standards. This is just a sample of some of them, with Group M taking a real leadership position around responsible media and responsible investment as they think about go-to-market, IPG thinking about media responsibility principles, agencies like Publicis as well, focusing on brand integrity. And we think this is only going to become more and more of an issue and more of a focus area for advertisers as they spend their dollars. So with that being said, we wanted to really create some sort of understanding of the market around brand suitability, what brands are thinking about it, how they understand it. And for that, we commissioned a study with Forrester Consulting, and Joanna, we're thrilled to have to walk through some of the results.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me. Really appreciate being a part of this research. It's always kind of cool to be able to come into one of Forrester's consulting projects and attack it as a subject matter expert and also learn. So today I'm here to talk about the research that was done between Zefr and Forrester Consulting, where we really looked in a more deep way at the questions around brand suitability and kind of level of understanding and so on and so forth in the market. But before we get there, I think I'll start by just doing a little bit of context setting, which is to say, maybe this seems obvious to everybody that video advertising is capturing mind share, and it's also capturing dollars when it comes to advertising dollars being spent. Certainly, I think we as consumers probably anecdotally in our own lives know this to be true, but just wanted to give a little bit of backbone to that by using some of Forrester's research to help tell this story. So when we actually reached out in 2021 to 800 B2C marketing decision makers, and this is from our business technographics data, to ask them if they plan to increase, decrease, or maintain spend of marketing budget in all of these different kinds of paid media environments, you can see that online video, OTT, really bubbles up to the top, with 46% actually saying that they plan to increase spend there. And the reality is that they are actually doing that. So this is from a separate piece of research that I published around overall spend by ad channel as compared against year-over-year growth in each of the ad channels that we were looking at, really because I was trying to paint a picture of what was going on when it came to investment and kind of evolution of spend in paid digital media. Actually, I shouldn't say digital, actually, because it was all media. And that lends itself very well to my first point, which is it is true that linear TV is very, very, very big. In absolute dollars, it does command a significant amount of ad spend. But the reality is that if you look at where all the growth is, this is where you see things like online video with significant year-over-year growth rates from 20 to 21, OTT, and CTV as well. So, you know, linear TV big, but there's a lot of energy around CTV, OTT, and online video when it comes to ad spend. The question, though, you know, does present itself when you think about all of the growth that's happening in sort of newer and evolving areas. Are advertisers really effectively contending with the challenges and really taking full advantage of the opportunity in some of these newer environments, whether they be social video or non-social video? Huge amount of opportunity, but, you know, it's not without some risk. So Zefr came to Forrester Consulting with a question, and we set out to help them answer it. So the hypothesis was that while there's tons of video content out there, especially with platforms like YouTube and environments like CTV, that brands may fear that their ads are running in unsuitable content. And as a result of kind of wanting scale, but feeling somewhat risk averse, they may be defaulting too heavily on the side of safety and using tactics like keyword blocking or limited curated site lists that may actually be ultimately more detrimental than positive. So we wanted to look as well at some of the challenges and opportunities that sort of surrounded these ideas. So we know that an emergency. So looking at the current state was part of the story that we were trying to uncover here, but we also wanted to look at some of the challenges that may exist as well as opportunities that might be presenting themselves. So when it came to challenges, we know that emerging industry standards have come to light, but there isn't necessarily consistency in methodology and classification that is specific to the video landscape. And the result of that may mean that marketers are somewhat limited in terms of transparency and insight into whether or not their ads are appearing not just in safe environments, but in suitable environments, which means that there's opportunity there for improvement. So being able to leverage and apply consistent and measurable technology for video approaches can help with transparency, expanding reach, and lowering costs over kind of more blunt approaches. So to try and understand how folks were kind of feeling about the video advertising landscape and to kind of mine the depths of their brains around things like safety and suitability and challenges and opportunities, we went out and surveyed 325 marketing strategy decision makers who were responsible for their organization's media and/or brand suitability strategy. All right, so I know there's a lot going on this slide, but this is just to give you an idea of who we actually surveyed. So looked at folks at varying levels of responsibility, but with more than 40% saying that they're influencing decisions related to their organization's video ad strategy, a third saying that they are final decision makers for organizing video ad strategy. So folks that are heavily involved in the video ad strategy for their organizations. We also looked across industries, and we looked across a couple of regions, specifically in the US and in the UK. Okay. So let's start by just painting a picture of how these folks are thinking about and employing video advertising right now. So as I mentioned earlier, we know that there's significant investment in linear TV, but there's also massive growth and lots of opportunity in other and more emerging forms of video. So for this group, when we asked them, how important are the following in your brand's video advertising strategy? 84% turned to online video aggregators as being important or extremely important, 75% with OTT, 70% with CTV platforms, 70% with online video publishers. So obviously there's a heavy representation in this group in seeing the importance of online video, CTV, and OTT environments. And when we ask folks, what are some of the capabilities that would actually help improve your video placement strategy? It is clear that they are looking for things that are going to be beneficial, specific to what they're doing in video, which is to say they appreciate that there are nuances that exist with video that may be quite different than that exist with other kinds of channels, formats, or environment. But secondarily, there was also a lot of interest in things like transparent content analysis. So that starts to tell you some really interesting things about where they see opportunity and perhaps where they see some challenge. So when we asked folks to give us a sense of why they thought it would be important to really optimize their video placement strategy, we heard some really interesting things. And I love these because they really feel like they're very much about the consumer and the consumer experience. So 57% actually said that they believed that it would improve customer satisfaction to be able to improve their overall video placement strategy, while 54% actually said higher video viewership. So clearly the folks that we surveyed for this particular research do see opportunity in optimizing the way that they approach video strategically. So now let's look a little bit at the sort of brand safety versus suitability question, because that was one of the things that we really wanted, again, to explore here was in the kind of curve of maturity of an emerging and kind of rapidly evolving and hugely important category like streaming video. How are folks essentially managing the experience, and are they taking advantage of all the opportunity that they can? Okay, so when we asked organizations in the survey a little bit more about brand suitability, we started to find some really interesting things. So one of the things we wanted to understand is, do they see what could be essentially the negative effect associated with not employing a really thoughtful brand suitability strategy? And we found that 46%, almost half, actually said that one risk was loss of consumer trust, and 45% actually said dissatisfied customers, with another more than 4 in 10 actually saying difficulty attracting new customers. So super interesting. Like they understand kind of intuitively that the more sophisticated that they can be, the more effectively they actually deliver experiences to consumers in environments that will really resonate, the better they're going to do. And then, of course, the opposite of that being true too, not optimizing against those things can have some really material consequences. But okay, so we talked a little bit about, this sort of maturity curve that I like to think of when we think about something like brand safety, which is sort of the explicit or overt prevention of obvious harm to the brand appearing in environments that are just frankly unsafe. And then the kind of more nuanced approach of brand suitability, which takes the conversation to one of fit, appropriateness, relevance, opportunity, right? How do you think about the environments that are the best fit? How do you make the most nuanced decisions around fit? But in a space like this that is still relatively immature and certainly, as we saw in the research, not as kind of well understood and well taken advantage of as perhaps it should be, there are some real challenges with current suitability approaches. So the first is that when we asked folks, how often are you revisiting or updating your brand suitability tactics, what we found is they're just not taking advantage of the opportunity as fully as they should be. Looking at these things, only 40%, just a little bit less, saying monthly, and 46%, almost half, saying only once a year. So essentially, in a really dynamic and rapidly changing environment where the world around us is dynamic and rapidly changing, brands are approaching this a little bit too much like a set it and forget it. And when big changes happen, so a perfect example being the COVID pandemic, that could mean big swings in what would be appropriate from a suitability standpoint, brands may just be leaving opportunity on the table, as well as potentially causing harm to the consumer experience and to the brand's perception in consumers' eyes, simply because they're not taking a proactive and kind of frequent enough look. So when it comes to the question of brand suitability controls, one of the things we were really interested in is where brands feel they're getting the kinds of information that they feel is most important to them. So what we found is that 72% of brands actually put high importance on post-campaign verification from both third party and first party, which is to say they are looking at this as an opportunity to get information from multiple parties to be able to understand the complete picture. In an environment like this one, where things are moving so quickly and where technology exists to be able to make much more kind of real-time and predictive kinds of decisions, they are undervaluing the opportunity that comes with something that is happening at a pre-bid basis, which is to say, in the moment before a decision is made, taking advantage of something like brand suitability, rather than defaulting to something that is, as I said, post facto, after the fact, when quite frankly, the moment has passed. Okay. As I said, this is a market that is still evolving. Andrew had some really interesting commentary at the beginning of the webinar, talking about some of the really interesting things that are happening at the industry level, as well as some of the really notable moves that we've seen on the part of, for example, some of the really big holding companies like IPG and WPP. But it is still relatively new. And so, what comes with new and evolving, it can be lack of consistency. So when we ask folks, what are challenges that your organization is experiencing with brand suitability when it comes to video, we heard just that. We heard things like lack of consistency among brand suitability terminology across multiple providers, as well that technology that was available in the space was sometimes missing key functionality. And so clearly, there are some things that as an industry just need to be addressed. There's an opportunity to continue to mature the space. As the space becomes more mature, people become more comfortable, they become likelier to adopt, and it's a virtuous cycle. So when we asked folks then, taking a more sort of positive tone here, when we asked folks, what steps are you taking to improve your brand suitability strategy, we did find that they were looking for solutions. 46% actually did say that they are exploring technology solutions to improve suitability, as well as doing things like monitoring where their videos appear and improving their insights and adopting industry standard taxonomies. So you're seeing brands, I think, recognize that decision makers recognize that there is an opportunity to be more proactive and take a more lean forward stance. And that feels really, really important. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, a consumer who is on the receiving end of an ad in any given environment isn't going to think, man, I sure am annoyed at the brand safety vendor who decided that I should see this ad in this environment. No, the thing that they're going to be thinking about is the brand whose ad it is that they're seeing. I mean, at the end of the day, for better or worse, brands are the accountable parties. They're the accountable parties for their dollars, for their performance, and for the consumer experience. So really, it means that this is not a wait on the sidelines kind of thing. This is a lean forward, proactive, take control of your fate kind of opportunity for brands. Because again, this is not just about protectionism and safety. This is about looking for opportunities to create best fit, to take best advantage of every potential opportunity, knowing your audience and knowing your brand and knowing the environments that are going to be the most relevant and that are going to create the best effect for you. And of course, that also means that you need to be educated to be able to stay on the offensive. This is no longer a time for defensiveness, which is, I think, again, it's to keep saying this, but a step in a maturity curve, right? Like you take the defense position of safety. The opportunity here is to take the offense position of finding new opportunity by taking a more sophisticated and more nuanced approach to create positive brand halo, better consumer experiences, finding new sources of reach, and all that good stuff. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew to give a little bit more information, I think, on what Zephyr's up to.
All right, thanks, Joanna. That was super interesting. I think from Zephyr's perspective, one of the things that we're really focused on is how do you actually take a lot of this data around knowing that there needs to be a new video stack for video, for suitability in video, understanding the kind of change in tenor from a more reactive to a proactive approach, and how do you actually put that into a strategy and a business? And one of the biggest learnings that we've seen is there's been huge benefits of adopting a common taxonomy of the GARM standards to make it a lot easier to actually take a lot of the research and a lot of the policy that's existing in the industry and putting it into the hands of the everyday media buyer. There are a couple key advantages to the GARM standards, and we'll walk through some of the approaches as well as the technical hurdles it takes to understand the GARM standards in video. So first, it's objective definition. So as brand suitability enters its maturity curve, as Joanna mentioned a few times, it requires it to be a little bit less fluffy and a little bit more grounded in some sort of common taxonomy. This provides a consistent definition across all platforms, across all media. So the entire buy side has one understanding, one single view of what the suitability standards mean. The second, in terms of actual customer reach, which is great from an advertiser perspective, is it actually enables more scale. So what the GARM standards have allowed us to do in tests is work with brands to remove the need for their keyword block lists for brand safety and suitability. Again, much more reactive, scale reducing challenges that often are really blunt and not as nuanced. They actually drive a lot of CPM inflations, and moving to the GARM standards instead of keyword block lists can unlock way more scale, more audiences for brands. And the third piece is from a digital activation perspective. So as the world turns more programmatic and becomes more digitally focused, it becomes harder and harder from a workflow standardization when there are tons of different point solutions. So by adopting the GARM standards, it allows the digital buying teams, the digital marketers, to have one standardized approach across all platforms, rather than a point solution that works differently for video, for YouTube versus Facebook versus TikTok. It allows one common workflow. So when we think about the technology that is required to actually understand this, we call this Cognition AI. And in order to actually solve for the GARM standards and brand suitability for video, it's a lot different from the open web and text because it requires a lot different data sources, a lot different data enrichment, and a lot different activation opportunity. So when we think about it in terms of data in, data enrichment, and data out, the first thing is we built an entire process where we ingest videos at scale. So we take in around 20 million new videos every day across the largest platforms in the world. We have partnerships, great partnerships with YouTube. We're part of the YTMP. We just were announced with TikTok in their TikTok world for brand suitability and brand safety measurement, as well as Facebook. We're a Facebook marketing partner. And what we do is we get all of the videos that are eligible for potential monetization in order to make a decision about whether or not a video can start to enter a campaign or be measured. From there, we get all that data and we actually enrich it to make sure we're understanding the context for an advertiser. So we do that by a combination of AI and human in the loop. This is important for us because one, we want to make sure we're actually getting the scale, which is only possible with machines. Human beings can't watch every video on these new platforms. It's not like television. It's just too much content out there. But we also want to make sure humans have a part of the process because we know video is highly subjective, it's nuanced. There needs to be that balance between human cognition and machine learning. So what we do is we have AI look at all the video components, computer vision, the audio transcript, the text translation, the thumbnails, and all the video features, right? So the title description, all of the metadata available. And we have a scaled human process in which we do crowdsourced review across millions of different videos per month that powers 5 billion daily video scores. So it's this combination of people looking at videos, refining the model, making sure that we're precise in our understanding. So there's this continuous feedback loop of constantly improving brand suitability. And from the output from an advertiser perspective is we make this into a front end. So an advertiser could either use this for their suitability targeting strategy to say, I want to be around specific types of videos, mapping to my GARM preferences, or from a measurement standpoint, say, hey, I want to on a post-bid verification side, understand exactly where I ran against with video level transparency. So it's all this data science behind it that makes the technology actually work to be able to solve for suitability in video. And when we think about evolving the tech stack for modern media consumption, as so much conversation is going to video, so much of the audience is going to video, it was really important to actually understand why we did this, right? We didn't just create a tech stack for the sake of creating a tech stack. It was because it was insufficient to actually understand video content by using keywords. And here's an example that we think is really interesting and exemplary of the larger challenge that exists with keywords. So much of video content, especially for younger viewers, is not relevant to what the words are about. So here's an example. Tons of young skewing content exists on YouTube. There's all sorts of different content popping up every single day, but the words are often misleading. So you see the words here are ice cream, hamburgers, donuts in the title. This is a video aimed at a kids audience for new parents. But when we actually ran this through a system of another company that looks at semantic technology and keywords, this was actually classified as a dessert and baking video because the words ice cream, hamburgers, and donuts. Clearly, if you actually look at the video, this is totally inaccurate. In the open web, if you saw those words, you would say, oh, this is probably about dessert and baking. But in the video, it's a really bad signal. We did the same video through our process. We're able to determine at 96% likelihood this is kids content, and at only 5% likelihood of food and drink. And this is where this different architecture for modern media and video is so important to actually make sure the precision is accurate. One more fun example, because I think this is a really interesting one, when there's duplicative content that exists, especially on UGC content, when there's a major trend, there's going to be so many different changes in the metadata, right? So we saw this example where a creator, Cardi B, which is a rapper, for those who are unfamiliar with Cardi B. But Cardi B is a very popular hip hop artist. She released a video last year that was under the acronym WAP. What we saw was this creator, and this is very common on platforms, posted the same video twice, but they posted that video with slightly different metadata on both capacities. So what we actually saw was, even though it's the same exact content, we wanted to see how a keyword technology would rate these videos. Again, the same exact video. What we saw, the first example, it said official audio. The name of the video was the same exact video. It was Cardi B, WAP, Megan Thee Stallion. And it was able to classify the keyword technology as hip hop music because official audio is in the metadata. Zefr also was able to classify this as hip hop and music. The same video, again, was posted 6 hours later by the same creator on the same channel. The only thing missing was official audio. And this got classified as a wireless technology video. Again, the reason why is because WAP also means wireless access protocol, but I don't think that's what Verizon and AT&T probably have in mind when they're thinking about the wireless technology space on the platforms. So we're able to understand, because of this architecture, even if the metadata changes, the actual context of the video, which is far more precise and hopefully helpful in suitability changes for brands. So when we think about it, we definitely are in a new paradigm for brand suitability, and it requires a much more always-on thought process around it. I think Joanna's point really earlier, which is a valid one, is it's not a set and forget it. It requires a constant understanding of what technology vendors are doing, how they're adapting to new platforms, in order to make sure your brand is getting exactly what you think you're paying for. So these are some of the 4 questions that we recommend every brand and agency think about when they're talking to companies like Zefr or any other verification company in the space to make sure your company is evolving their tech with you. So 1, how does your video suitability process differ from open web technology? Again, because video is so different from the open web, it's important to just know those distinctions. 2, how does the suitability process differ between products, right? Being in a large-scale auction environment, versus working with a publisher, there's different scale parameters to understand, making sure that your brand is aware of that. 3rd, how did you calibrate your verification of the GARM industry standards? We see that this is an easy way for brands to actually have a common taxonomy. The more we move away from these kind of GARM industry standards and go into custom taxonomies, the harder it is to ever have a consistent stance on brand suitability. So we think this is really important to make sure that all brands are aware that their verification providers should map back to the GARM standards. And then 4 is, how do you actually measure that the content scoring is accurate? So doing an audit, making sure you're getting, if something says that it's a food and cooking video, making sure it's not a kids video, and doing that across the board to make sure that when you're getting a verification report or a targeting report, that the vendor is actually providing accurate, transparent scoring, because that's super important and we're very lucky to have your perspective on this. So I wanted to ask you a couple of things. So first, when we talk about the maturation of brand suitability, it's always hard when a category is emerging to understand exactly where we are in the space. How do you see it right now? Do you see it sort of like when viewability was starting? Is it something different? Where do you see brand suitability as a strategy?
Well, the interesting thing about viewability is it kind of should have struck all of us really early on that it mattered whether a consumer could actually see an ad or not. So, on a certain level, you can argue that that is a fairly black or white kind of conversation. Like, once you understand that there's a thing called viewability that you should care about, there's kind of no not understanding that, right? Like, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Where something like suitability, I think, is a little bit more of a nuanced and maybe more sophisticated kind of question, where it really becomes about you as a brand and your audience and your goals, and making sure that you are taking best advantage of every opportunity, which is just not, I mean, on the surface is not as maybe simple as something like this viewability, but again, the upside being that the opportunity it creates, I think, is pretty big, because every brand is an individual brand and the ethos of each brand is different, and no one knows your brand like you do. And so how do you make sure that you're really putting a lot of thought and care into that? It feels really important in terms of how far we are on the maturity curve. I mean, you probably could answer that even better than I could, but it seems to me that just based on what was found in the research and just my general sense of the market, that there's just lots of opportunity being left on the table, and that safety and viewability suitability may be being used interchangeably, people not in general fully understanding what one is versus the other, or how one is maybe table stakes and then the other is sort of additive on top.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. I think from my side, I totally agree. I think part of the challenge is because viewability is so binary, like you either saw an ad or you didn't. Suitability, the squishiness has its pros and its cons, right? So the pros are if you're a technology provider, you can kind of choose your own adventure up until now to say, oh, we do suitability. This is how it works. What we are really focused on is trying to put a more of a science behind suitability, knowing that it'll never be black and white in the same way viewability is, but creating some sort of structure so that you can measure it. So we can't have this endless suitability kind of conversation take 20 different tangents. And for us, that's a big reason why we are such big supporters of the GARM standards, is because they map out suitability. It's the first inning of it. It'll evolve over time, but at least it creates some sort of groundwork for companies to build on, rather than it just being the Wild West. So when we see it in the maturity curve, I think that was a big driver in making sure that there was more substance behind what suitability meant, knowing it'll never be black and white, but getting a little bit further out of the gray. Obviously, there's a mad rush to try to see who can get TV budgets, as linear TV is still, though not growing in the way that platforms are growing, it still commands a pretty large amount of the investment pie. How do you see brand suitability in digital affecting that in any way? Do you think that's something that's a tailwind if brands can get it right, or is it just too soon to tell?
Well, that's such an interesting question. I mean, on a certain level, TV is a repeatable, well understood machine, linear TV, for big brands and the agencies who are really typically the ones that are running the negotiations and kind of managing the linear TV budgets. And marketing mix models have been telling brands, since the dawn of time, how much they should spend and where, and against how many 18 to 24-year-olds and so on and so forth. And in the digital world, things are just so different. I mean, their sources of scale don't have to be so unilateral. It's much more audience driven. It's much more dynamic, and kind of the fragmentation and variability of content is just so, it's so different. So I think I guess what I would say is I don't know that the answer is that it has to be one or the other. What it really has to be is where are your audiences and where do you feel like you can find them and then impact them in some way. So linear TV absolutely plays a role because, you know, it does. People do still watch linear broadcast television, but the opportunity to be much more fine-tuned and kind of look for really interesting pockets of content or environments or fit with certain kinds of audiences exists in a way in digital that it just doesn't really in linear broadcast. So something like Suitability is almost like, how do you best exploit every potential opportunity that exists, right? Rather than just kind of using the blunt instruments of something like, you know, only contextual adjacency or keyword blocking, or, you know what I mean, to something that's a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. I mean, it's kind of the holy grail, I guess, for all of the digital ecosystem is trying to figure out who can make the biggest dent. I think you're exactly right. Marketers follow the audience. From our side, it's an interesting spot because the platforms play such a huge role in getting younger audiences that are hard to reach in television. But the challenge is how do you actually make sure you're balancing the content adjacency that you love about television and the audience without constraining the scale by being so precise that you're ruining the entire reason you're investing in the platforms to begin with, right? So finding that balance between reach and relevance, we think that brand suitability hopefully can play a big role in that, but it's early days and totally agree. It's not going to be one or the other, but we do think the more brands can kind of lean in on the tech space, the more confident they'll be in taking and testing more of the online platforms as an alternative to reach younger audiences from linear TV. So, um, so great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Those are all of the questions. You can read the full report online. We'll have links to it all over LinkedIn and on Zefr.com. And we really appreciate Joanna joining us today, knowing that she has tons of places to be. We appreciate you spending an hour with us, and it'll live in perpetuity on the internet, which is even better for everyone. So thanks so much. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.